My stepmother kicked me out on my 18th birthday. She said I inherited a worthless corn crib. What I found inside saved me. And if you've ever been told that what you have, or who you are, is worthless, I want you to stick around. Subscribe, like the video, because this story is for you. This is for all of us who were handed a pile of rust and told to call it a future. The air in the house was always the same temperature, a stale, recycled cool that never changed with the seasons. It was the temperature of waiting. For 2 years, since my father's accident, I had been waiting. Waiting to finish school. Waiting to turn 18. Waiting for the silence in my own home to stop feeling like an accusation. Diane, my stepmother, wasn't cruel in the storybook sense. There was no shouting, no overt malice. There was just a progressive, systematic removal of warmth. My father's photos came down from the mantelpiece first, replaced by abstract art in muted grays and blues. The food she cooked became simpler, single-portion meals for one that she'd eat while watching TV, leaving me to fend for myself with the leftovers from a life that no longer included me. I was a tenant whose lease was about to expire. On the morning of my 18th birthday, the chill was sharper. I came downstairs to find 2 black trash bags and a cardboard box next to the front door. My things. Or what she had deemed were my things. Clothes, a few books, the laptop my dad had bought me. Nothing from the house itself. Nothing that had been his. "Happy birthday, Leo," she said, not looking up from her tablet at the kitchen island. A pristine white mug of coffee was steaming next to her elbow. "There's an envelope for you on the counter." I didn't say anything. I walked over and picked it up. It was thick, creamy paper, embossed with the name of a law firm I'd never heard of. My name was typed neatly on the front. "The Social Security payments stopped today," she continued, her voice as flat as the marble countertop. "As we discussed, your legal status as a dependent in this household is concluded. You have until noon." As we discussed. That was her way of framing a verdict she had delivered months ago. There was no discussion. There was only the slow, cold certainty of this exact moment. I looked from the bags to her, a woman who had once promised my father she would love me as her own son. Her face was a placid mask. No anger, no sadness, just finality. It was like watching a transaction being completed. I opened the envelope. The legal jargon swam in front of my eyes. Words like beneficiary, estate, probate. The name that jumped out at me was Arthur Vance. My grandfather, my mom's dad. A man I hadn't seen since I was 5. A man my father only referred to as a complicated story, usually with a sigh. He had passed away over a year ago, apparently. No one had told me. The letter stated that upon my 18th birthday, I was to take sole ownership of the property and all structures located at 1412 Dust Road, Havenwood County. It was my inheritance. "What is it?" Diane asked, a flicker of something, curiosity, maybe, in her eyes. "It's from a lawyer," I said, my voice hoarse. "From my grandfather, Arthur. He left me a property." She finally looked at me then. She put her tablet down and a small, dry smile touched her lips. It was the most emotion I'd seen from her in a year. "Arthur Vance, of course. Let me guess. That worthless patch of dirt out in the middle of nowhere." I stared at her, confused. "You know about it? Your father used to get letters from the county about it. Unpaid taxes, code violations. He always threw them out. Said it was your grandfather's last and greatest monument to failure." She picked up her coffee mug. "It's a ruined farmhouse on a few acres of weeds, and if I recall correctly, the only thing still standing is the corn crib. Congratulations, Leo. You've inherited a corn crib. Maybe you can live in it." The words were meant to sting, and they did. They landed like sharp little stones. A worthless patch of dirt. A monument to failure. A corn crib. It wasn't an inheritance, it was a punchline. A final joke from a ghost I couldn't even remember. I looked at the letter, at the official seal, at the address that sounded like something out of a horror movie. 1412 Dust Road. Noon, she repeated, her gaze dropping back to her screen. The conversation was over. My childhood was over. I carried my things to the curb. The trash bags were heavy, clumsy. The box was filled with the few things that truly mattered. A framed photo of me and my dad at a baseball game, his old watch that didn't work anymore, a stack of dog-eared paperbacks. I sat on the curb next to my meager possessions, the lawyer's letter clutched in my hand. Cars drove by, sleek and clean, on their way to important places. I was an obstacle, a piece of roadside debris. The feeling wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness, not yet. It was a profound and terrifying hollowness. I had nowhere to go. My friends were all heading to college, their lives packed neatly into university-approved boxes. I had 2 trash bags and a legal title to a corn crib. A bus schedule I'd pulled from the library the week before was folded in my pocket. I knew there was a route that went out to the rural counties. It was a long, slow trip, a journey away from everything I knew and into the heart of what Diane had called my grandfather's failure. I looked back at the pristine house, the manicured lawn, the window where she was probably watching, waiting for me to be gone. Failure. The word echoed in my head. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was it, the end of the line. But as I stood up and shouldered the strap of my duffel bag, a different thought, small and stubborn, pushed its way through the fog. It wasn't an end. It was a destination. It was the only one I had. I didn't know what I would find at 1412 Dust Road, but it couldn't be any colder or emptier than the home I was leaving behind. It was a place to go, and right then, a place to go was everything. The bus station was a symphony of quiet desperation. People with worn-out shoes and anxious eyes, waiting for buses that would take them to jobs they didn't like or relatives they didn't want to see. It smelled of diesel fumes and stale popcorn. I bought a one-way ticket to a town called Oakhaven, the closest stop to Havenwood County the clerk could find on her map. It cost me $24, a significant dent in the $153 I had to my name. The money was crumpled in my pocket, saved up from odd jobs, mowing lawns and washing cars, in a neighborhood where people paid you to go away as much as they paid you for the work. It felt like a fortune and nothing at all, simultaneously. Enough to get me there, but for what came after? I couldn't let my mind go there. One step at a time. Get on the bus. That was the only plan. I found a seat by a grimy window and piled my bags on the empty seat beside me, a silent declaration that I wanted to be left alone. The city slid past the glass, its tall, reflective buildings giving way to sprawling suburbs with identical houses and perfect green lawns. It was the world I was supposed to want, the world my father had worked so hard to give me. Now it felt like a foreign country. I watched it recede without a pang of regret. You can't miss a place that has already erased you. My life with Diane after my dad died had been a lesson in becoming invisible. At first, there was a shared grief, a fragile alliance against the gaping hole he'd left. We'd eat together, talk about him. But slowly, imperceptibly, the tide changed. Her grief hardened into something else, something sharp and resentful. My presence in the house became a constant, living reminder of the man she had lost and the future she had lost with him. I was the past, and she wanted to move on. She started dating a man who sold high-end real estate, a man with a glossy smile and no children. They talked about downsizing, about new beginnings. I was not part of that conversation. I was the thing to be downsized. The lawyer's letter felt like a strange, posthumous intervention. I read it again as the bus rumbled onto the highway. The language was dense, but the core of it was simple. Arthur Vance, my maternal grandfather, had established a trust. He had placed his only remaining asset, the property, into it. The trust was to be dissolved, and the asset transferred to his sole surviving descendant, Leo Vance Carter, upon my 18th birthday. There was a name and a number at the bottom. Mr. Julian Abernathy, attorney at law. I thought about what Diane had said. A monument to failure. A deadbeat. That's all I'd ever known of him. A vague, shadowy figure from early childhood. I had a single, faded memory of a man with large, calloused hands and a laugh that sounded like rocks tumbling downhill. He'd lifted me onto his shoulders so I could touch the leaves of a tall tree. The memory was hazy, dreamlike. It didn't square with the image of a failure. But my father had never wanted to talk about him, and after my mother died when I was a baby, there was no one else to ask. The suburbs melted into strip malls, then into farmland. The sky grew bigger. The bus made stops in small towns that were little more than a gas station and a church. People got on and off, their faces etched with the slow, steady rhythm of rural life. I felt a growing sense of dislocation, like I was moving backward in time. The world outside the window was becoming quieter, emptier, more like the feeling inside me. I must have drifted off, because I woke with a start as the bus lurched to a halt. The driver called out, "Oak Haven! Last stop for Oak Haven!" I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away with a hiss of its air brakes, leaving me in a profound silence. The station was just a covered bench on the side of a two-lane road. Across the street was a general store with a faded Coca-Cola sign and a gas station with old-fashioned pumps. A single traffic light blinked yellow, though there were no cars to direct. The air smelled of damp earth and something sweet, like hay. It had rained recently. The pavement was dark and slick. A man in overalls was sweeping the porch of the general store. He watched me as I gathered my bags. He wasn't hostile, just curious. I was clearly not from around here. "You need a ride, son?" he asked, his voice a low drawl. "I'm looking for Dust Road," I said, my voice sounding thin in the open air. He stopped sweeping and leaned on his broom. "Dust Road? That's a ways out. A good 5-6 miles. It ain't really a road anymore, more of a track. What you got out there?" "A property," I said, feeling the foolishness of the words. "Number 1412. His eyebrows went up. "The old Vance place." He looked me up and down, then at my bags. A flicker of understanding, or maybe pity, crossed his face. "That place has been empty for the better part of 20 years, since old Arthur left." He chose the word carefully. "You family?" "His grandson," I said. The man nodded slowly. "I see." He seemed to be debating something. "Look, the sun'll be setting in a couple of hours. It's no place to be trying to find after dark. My boy's making a delivery out that way in a bit. He can take you to the turnoff at least. Save you a few miles." I don't have much to pay," I started, fumbling in my pocket. He waved a hand, dismissing it. "Don't worry about it. Just wait here on the bench. Name's Earl." "Leo," I said. "All right, Leo." He went back to his sweeping, the rhythmic scrape of the bristles the only sound. I sat on the bench, the reality of my situation crashing down on me. I was in a town I'd never heard of, waiting for a stranger to give me a ride to a derelict property I'd inherited from a man I didn't know, a man everyone seemed to consider a failure. Diane's mocking voice echoed in my head. A worthless corn crib. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, but it felt like a warning. The day was ending, the light was running out, and I was walking willingly into the dark. Earl's son was a quiet teenager who drove a beat-up pickup truck that smelled of fertilizer and gasoline. He didn't say much, just nodded when Earl told him where to take me. I threw my bags in the truck bed and climbed into the passenger seat. We rattled down the main road, then turned onto a smaller paved road, And then, just as Earl had said, onto a track of packed dirt and gravel. The trees grew closer together, their branches forming a canopy that swallowed the last of the evening light. "This is the turnoff for Dust Road," the kid said, pulling over. "The house is about a mile in. Can't miss it. It's the only thing out here." "Thanks," I said, my voice tight. I got out and hauled my bags from the back. The truck's taillights disappeared around a bend, and I was plunged into a silence so deep it felt like pressure against my eardrums. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of pine and wet leaves. The only light was the sliver of a crescent moon, barely enough to see the path in front of me. The walk was longer than a mile, or at least it felt like it. The dirt track was rutted and slick with mud in places. My flimsy city sneakers were soaked in minutes. Every snap of a twig in the woods around me sent a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. I was a city kid, used to the constant hum of traffic and the safety of streetlights. This was a different world, one governed by older, wilder rules. I clutched the strap of my bag, my knuckles white. Finally, the trees opened up into a clearing, and I saw it. The moonlight cast a skeletal glow on the scene. A farmhouse, its roof sagging in the middle like a broken back, stood dark and silent. The windows were gaping black squares. Most of the glass was gone. The porch tilted at a drunken angle. To the left, set apart from the house, was another structure. It was tall and octagonal, built of weathered wooden slats with gaps between them. The corn crib. It was larger than I had imagined, and in the gloom, it looked like a watchtower standing guard over the decay. Diane's words came back to me. A monument to failure. It looked the part. The yard was a tangle of weeds and thorny bushes that scraped at my jeans. A wave of despair washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. This was a mistake. A shelter, a park bench, anything would be better than this. This wasn't a place to live, it was a place to be forgotten. I dropped my bags in the wet grass and trudged toward the house. The front steps groaned under my weight, and I tested each one before putting my full weight down. The front door was a solid piece of wood, scarred and bleached by the sun. I reached for the knob, turned it. Locked. Of course, it was locked. I pushed against it with my shoulder, but it didn't budge. I circled the house, peering into the dark, empty rooms through the broken windows. There was no way in. Defeated, I slumped onto the tilting porch, my head in my hands. The cold from the damp wood seeped into my clothes. What was I supposed to do? Sleep out here? Break a window and risk getting cut? My hope, already a fragile thing, was crumbling. My eyes drifted back to the corn crib. It stood there, stark and strange against the night sky. It was the reason I was here. The punchline to the joke of my inheritance. A bitter curiosity pulled me to my feet. I walked across the overgrown yard, the wet weeds soaking my pants to the knees. Up close, the crib was an impressive structure. The wood was ancient, silvery gray, and covered in lichen. It was built to last. The door was a simple plank construction, held shut by a wooden latch. I lifted the latch. It swung open with a low groan. I peered inside. It was dark, but I could make out a conical pile of something in the center. Old corn cobs, husks, the detritus of harvests long past. The air smelled of dust, mice, and the sweet, dry scent of decay. It was just an empty, useless farm building. Diane was right. I was about to turn away when my eyes caught something. Tacked to the inside of the door, just above my head and sheltered from the rain by the overhang of the roof, was a small, square piece of paper, yellowed with age. It wasn't a random scrap. It was folded neatly and held in place by a single, rusty thumbtack. My heart started to beat a little faster. I reached up and carefully worked the thumbtack free. I unfolded the paper. In the faint moonlight, I could just make out the handwriting. It was faint, spidery but deliberate. It said, "The house keeps the rain out, the corn keeps the truth." Underneath the words was a small, simple drawing of a floorboard with a single knot in it, and next to that, a single, tarnished brass key tied to the paper with a piece of twine. I stared at the key in my palm. It wasn't a key for the corn crib. It was a house key, an old-fashioned skeleton key. He had left it for me. A flicker of something warm and electric shot through me. This wasn't just decay. It wasn't just an ending. This was a message. This was a beginning. The house keeps the rain out. I looked from the key to the dark, silent farmhouse. It was a promise. The corn keeps the truth. I looked into the dusty darkness of the crib. It was a puzzle. And for the first time since I'd been handed that envelope, I felt a surge of purpose. I wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore. I was a participant in a story I didn't yet understand. The key slid into the lock of the farmhouse with a satisfying click. The mechanism was stiff from years of disuse, but with a bit of force, the bolt slid back. The door swung inward on a long, protesting groan, opening into a darkness that felt heavier and more absolute than the night outside. It was the smell that hit me first. Not the sharp odor of mold and rot I had expected, but something softer. The scent of old wood, dust, cold ashes from a long dead fire, and the faint, papery aroma of forgotten books. It smelled like time itself. I stepped inside, leaving my wet bags on the porch. I used the flashlight on my phone to cut through the gloom. The beams sliced across a room frozen in a state of sudden departure. A thick layer of dust covered everything like a funeral shroud. A plaid armchair sat facing a cold stone fireplace. A book lay open on a small end table beside it, its pages curled and yellow. In the kitchen, a mug sat next to the sink. It felt like someone had just stepped out for a moment and never come back. 20 years ago. The furniture was simple, handmade, and solid. Nothing like the sleek, disposable stuff in Diane's house. This was a place where things were meant to last. Despite the dust and the cobwebs, the house felt solid. The roof might be sagging, but the bones were good. My grandfather had built this place. The thought was a strange comfort. I spent an hour doing a cursory sweep. 1 bedroom downstairs, 2 more upstairs under the eaves. The beds were stripped, the mattresses bare. In the master bedroom, the closet was empty except for a pair of worn leather work boots. It was a ghost of a life. Everything personal had been scrubbed from the premises. Everything except for the house itself. I was exhausted, my clothes were damp, and I was starving. But the note from the corn crib echoed in my mind. The corn keeps the truth. The house was a shelter, a place to get out of the rain, just as the note had promised. But the answer I was looking for wasn't here. It was back outside, in that strange, slatted tower. I found a half-used bag of charcoal for a grill on the back porch and, using pages from a water-damaged phone book I found, I managed to get a small, smoky fire going in the fireplace. The warmth was a blessing, chasing away the deep chill in my bones. I laid my wet clothes out on the hearth to dry. There was no food, no running water, but there was shelter. There was a fire. It was more than I'd had a few hours ago. Once I was dry and a little warmer, the pull of the corn crib was too strong to ignore. I took my phone and went back out. The moon was higher now, casting sharper shadows. The crib loomed, its purpose now feeling less like a joke and more like a challenge. I stepped inside again, the flashlight beam dancing over the walls. The drawing on the note had shown a floorboard with a knot. I knelt, sweeping away the loose husks and cobs from the wooden floor. The floor was made of thick planks, worn smooth over the decades. I started examining them one by one, my fingers tracing the grain, searching for the specific knot from the drawing. It was in the far corner, half buried under the main pile of debris. A dark, circular knot in the wood, exactly like the one he had drawn. I pressed on it. Nothing. I tried to pry the board up with my fingers, but it was nailed down tight. I needed a tool, a lever. I went back to the house and rummaged through the kitchen drawers. They were all empty. I searched the back porch, and leaning against the wall, I found it. A rusty tire iron. It was heavy in my hand, a solid piece of steel. Back in the crib, I wedged the tip of the tire iron into the crack beside the marked floorboard. I put my weight on it. The wood groaned in protest. The nails squealed as they pulled free. With a final, splintering crack, the board lifted. Beneath it was not dirt, but a dark, hollow space. My heart hammered against my ribs. I shone my light into the hole. The beam fell on a dark green metal box. It was an old military-style ammunition can, the kind designed to be waterproof and indestructible. It had a heavy latch on the front. My hands were trembling as I reached in and lifted it out. It was heavy, solid. I set it on the floor and fumbled with the latch. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. The contents were packed tightly. On top was a stack of letters, bundled in twine. The envelopes yellowed with age. All of them were addressed to me, Leo Vance Carter, in the same spidery handwriting I'd seen on the note. Beneath the letters were several thick, paper-wrapped bundles. I tore the corner off one. My breath caught in my throat. It was cash. $100 bills. There were at least 10 bundles. It was an impossible amount of money. And beneath the money, at the very bottom of the box, was a thick, leather-bound journal. I sat there, cross-legged on the dusty floor of the corn crib, the flashlight beam illuminating the treasure trove in front of me. It didn't feel real. The money, the letters. It was too much. It was the stuff of movies, not my life. With shaking fingers, I untied the twine from the stack of letters. The top one was thicker than the rest. On the envelope, it just said, "Leo, read this first." I opened it. The paper was thin, almost translucent with age. The ink was slightly faded. I began to read. "My dearest Leo," it started, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have come of age. And I am sorry. I am so sorry. I know you will have questions. I know you probably think of me as the man who abandoned your grandmother, who abandoned your father, who abandoned you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope, when you have finished these letters, you will at least understand." The words blurred. I had to stop and wipe my eyes. The emotion in the script was raw, a direct line from his heart to mine across 20 years of silence. "I didn't run away, son. I was forced out. I made a mistake a long time ago. I was a builder, like my father before me. I started a construction business with a partner. We were successful, too successful. We attracted the wrong kind of attention. A development company from the city, Stonegate Holdings, they wanted to get their hooks into Havenwood County. They saw the farmland, the woods, and they didn't see beauty. They saw subdivisions and strip malls. They tried to buy me out. I refused. This land, this home, it was my father's, and his father's before that. It wasn't for sale. They didn't take no for an answer. My partner was a weaker man. They got to him. He signed away his half of the business, but they wanted it all. They started making threats. Not to me, to your father. He was just a young man then, starting his own life. They threatened you, just a baby. I realized they would not stop. They would burn this place to the ground with us in it if they had to. I couldn't protect you if I stayed. So I made a choice. I staged a bankruptcy. I let the business collapse. I let everyone, including your father, believe I was a failure, a drunk who had lost everything. It was easier, safer for him to hate me than to know the truth. The hatred would keep him away. It would keep you away. And if you were away, You were safe. I transferred the deed to this property into a blind trust, set to mature on your 18th birthday. It was the only thing I could save, the only piece of our family I could pass on to you, clean and clear. I disappeared. I lived out my days in another state, under another name, watching from a distance. It was a long, lonely penance. I had to put the letter down. My chest felt tight, like a band was squeezing my lungs. All my life, the story of my grandfather had been a simple one. He was the family disgrace, the man who ran away. But it was all a lie. It wasn't a story of abandonment. It was a story of protection, a brutal, heartbreaking act of love. He hadn't thrown his life away. He had sacrificed it. For my father. For me. I cried then. Not quiet tears, but deep, ragged sobs that tore through the silence of the night. I cried for the grandfather I never knew. I cried for the father who had died believing his own dad had abandoned him. I cried for the lonely old man living under a fake name, watching his family from afar. I sat there in the dust and the dark, surrounded by a ghost's love and a fortune I didn't understand, and wept until I had nothing left. The world had been one way for my entire life. My father was the good man, my grandfather the bad one. The property was a joke. My inheritance was worthless. And in the space of a few hours, reading a single letter, every single one of those truths had been shattered. It was like the ground beneath my feet had turned to dust. And listen, if you've ever had a moment like that, a moment where a secret is revealed and suddenly your whole past looks different, your whole world is turned upside down, I want you to let me know in the comments. Because it is one of the loneliest, most disorienting feelings in the world. And it's important to know you're not the only one who has had to rebuild their reality from scratch. This community, this channel, it's for people who get it. Now, let's get back to the story. When the tears finally subsided, a cold clarity began to settle in. I picked up the next letter. There were dozens of them, dated over years. He had been writing to me my whole life. Birthday letters, holiday letters, letters just to talk, to tell me about his day, knowing I would never read them until this very moment. It was a lifetime of one-sided conversations, a chronicle of his love and his loneliness. I read for hours, huddled in the strange, slatted light of the corn crib, the world outside ceasing to exist. He told me stories about my mother, who he had adored. He told me about teaching my father how to build, how to fish, how to be a good man. He filled in the vast, empty spaces of my own history. With every page, the caricature of the deadbeat grandfather dissolved, replaced by a man of deep integrity and profound sorrow. Then I got to the last letter and the journal. Leo, the final letter began, the handwriting a little shakier. If you've made it this far, you know the truth of the past. But this last part is about the future. Your future. The money in this box is what I was able to save over many years. It's not a fortune, but it should be enough. Enough for you to go anywhere, to do anything. To go to college, to start a life far away from here. That is your first choice. Take the money, walk away, and never look back. Be free. I will not blame you. In many ways, it's what I want for you. But there is another choice. The company, Stonegate Holdings, they never went away. They're bigger now, more powerful. They've been buying up land all over the county, patiently, relentlessly. They still want this piece. My lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, his number is in the journal. He tells me they've been sending lowball offers for years, waiting for the property to fall into their hands. They will come for you. They will see a kid, alone and with no resources, and they will try to bully you into selling for pennies on the dollar. This is where the journal comes in. When all this started, I began to document everything. Every threat, every illegal offer, every conversation. I have names, dates, records of their intimidation tactics. It's not enough to put them in jail. They're too slick for that. But it's enough to cause them a world of trouble. It's leverage. The journal is the truth, Leo. The truth of their greed. So that is your second choice. You can stay. You can use the money not to run, but to fight. To fix this house. To work this land. To use the journal to hold them at bay and show them that one person standing on their own ground can't be pushed around. It's a harder path. It's a dangerous path. They will not make it easy. But this place, this land is your birthright. It was bought not with money, but with the sweat and love of our family for generations. To give it up to men like that, it feels like a final defeat. The choice is yours. Freedom or legacy. The easy road or the right one. I cannot make it for you. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of the man I know you have become. Your loving grandfather, Arthur. I closed my eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on me. It wasn't just an inheritance of land and money. It was an inheritance of a fight. He had left me a choice that would define the rest of my life. I could take the cash, and it was more money than I had ever dreamed of, and disappear. I could get an apartment, go to school, invent a new identity for myself, one free from the ghosts of Havenwood County. I could be safe. Or I could stay. I could stand on this patch of dirt and face down the same corporate dragon that had driven my grandfather away. I could pour my life, my energy, and this money into a broken-down house and a field of weeds. I could pick up a 20-year-old fight that wasn't mine. My whole life, choices had been made for me. Where to live, what to do, when to leave. I was an object moved around on a board I couldn't see. Now, for the first time, I had been given true agency, the power to determine my own path. And it was terrifying. I looked at the bundles of cash, a passport to an easy life. Then I looked through the slats of the corn crib at the dark, dilapidated farmhouse. One was an escape, the other was a home. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the old plaid armchair by the dying embers of the fire, the metal box on the floor beside me. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It was filled with the presence of my grandfather, with the weight of his story. I turned the choices over and over in my mind. Run. The word was a siren song. Go to a city where no one knew my name. Get a degree. Find a job. Build a life on a foundation of cash, free from the complications of the past. It was the sensible thing to do. It was what any rational person would do. Diane would do it in a heartbeat. She'd call me a fool for even considering otherwise. Stay. The word was heavy. It felt like putting down roots in hard, rocky soil. It meant struggle. It meant facing down a faceless corporation with deep pockets and no morals. It meant pouring that money not into a future, but into the past, into restoring something broken. It meant honoring a man I'd never known and a sacrifice I was only just beginning to comprehend. I thought about my father. He'd lived his whole life believing his dad was a failure. He never knew his father had given up everything to keep him safe. If I ran, if I let Stonegate take this land, then their victory would be complete. They would have finally succeeded in erasing my family from this place. My grandfather's sacrifice would be for nothing. The lie would become the final truth. As dawn began to break, a pale, watery light filtered through the grimy windows. It fell across the dusty floor and landed on the worn leather boots I'd found in the upstairs closet. My grandfather's boots. They were scuffed and cracked, the soles worn thin, but they were built for work. They were boots for a man who stood his ground, who built things with his own two hands. I looked from the boots to the metal box. The money was an escape hatch. The journal was a weapon. The house was a battlefield. My grandfather hadn't just left me a choice between running and fighting. He had left me a choice between who I was going to be. Was I going to be the boy who was kicked out? The boy who ran from trouble? Or was I going to be Arthur Vance's grandson? The sun rose higher, and a single determined beam of light cut through the gloom and struck the corn crib, making the old wood glow like gold. It was in that crib, in that dusty, forgotten space, that my life had been given back to me. It wasn't a monument to failure. It was a vault. It was a sanctuary. It was where the truth had been kept safe, waiting for me. I stood up, my body stiff from the long night. I walked over to the window and looked out at the overgrown yard, at the tilting porch, at the sagging roof. It wasn't a ruin, it was a project. It wasn't a burden, it was a responsibility. I knew what I had to do. I found the small, leather-bound journal at the bottom of the box. My grandfather's number for his lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, was written neatly on the first page. I took out my phone. The battery was at 15%. It was now or never. My hand was shaking so badly I had to dial the number twice. It rang, each ring echoing the frantic beat of my own heart. I was about to hang up, convinced it was a dead number after all this time, when a voice answered. It was a calm, steady voice, an old voice. Abernathy. I cleared my throat. Hello, my name is Leo Carter. I was given your number by my grandfather, Arthur Vance. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought he'd hung up. Then the voice came back, softer this time. Leo, my God, you got it. You found it. There was an immense, audible wave of relief in his words. I found it, I confirmed, my own voice barely a whisper. The box, the letters, the journal. I've been waiting for this call for a very long time, son, Mr. Abernathy said. Your grandfather, he was a great man, one of the best I ever knew. He made me promise I'd be here for you when the time came. What have you decided? He didn't need to elaborate. He knew about the choice. He had been a part of it from the beginning. He was the guardian of the story, waiting for the main character to finally arrive. I took a deep breath, looking out the window at the corn crib. I'm staying, I said, and the words felt more solid, more real than anything I had ever said in my life. I'm not selling. I'm going to fight them. Another pause, but this one was different. It was filled with something that sounded like respect. Good, he said simply. That's what he hoped you would do. But he wanted you to know that the other path was just as valid. There is no shame in choosing safety, Leo. I know, I said, but this feels right. This feels like home. It is your home, Mr. Abernathy affirmed. All right, then we have work to do. The first thing you need to know is that Stonegate Holdings is not a foe to be taken lightly. They've spent the last 2 decades consolidating their power in the county. They have friends on the zoning board, in the sheriff's department. They operate through shell corporations and legal loopholes. They will come at you hard and fast, and they will not play fair. He said that in his letters, I told him. He said they'd see me as an easy target. And they will, the lawyer said. An 18-year-old kid, all alone on a derelict property. They'll file nuisance complaints. They'll challenge the title. They'll make you an offer that seems incredibly generous, then threaten you when you refuse. We need to be prepared. The journal is our best defense. It's a record of their pattern of behavior. It won't win a case on its own, but it will give us leverage for a restraining order and make any legal challenge they mount look like what it is, harassment. We talked for another hour. He laid out the strategy, the first steps. He would file a notice of representation immediately, letting Stonegate know that I was not, in fact, alone. He would start the process of getting the property taxes and any outstanding fines cleared, using a portion of the funds my grandfather had left. He instructed me to deposit the cash into a new bank account in Oakhaven, but to do it in small increments to avoid raising red flags. He told me to start keeping my own journal, documenting every car that drove by, every piece of mail I received. When I hung up the phone, the world felt different. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But now it was mixed with something else, determination. I had a plan. I had an ally. I wasn't just a boy sitting in a dusty house anymore. I was a client. I was a landowner. I was a threat. The first order of business was practical. Survival. I took $2,000 from one of the bundles, tucked it into my pocket, and started the long walk back into Oakhaven. This time, the journey felt different. I wasn't an exile wandering into the unknown. I was a resident, heading into town to get supplies. The distinction was small, but it meant everything. At the general store, Earl was back on the porch, this time drinking a coffee. He saw me coming, and a look of surprise crossed his face. "Well, I'll be," he said. "You survived the night." There was a hint of a smile in his eyes. "I did," I said, feeling a grin spread across my own face. "It's my place now. I'm fixing it up." He looked me over. The dirt, the determined set of my jaw. He nodded slowly. "That place needs a lot of fixing. You'll need help." "I know," I said, "starting with getting the power and water turned on." He pointed with his thumb toward a small office building across the street. "That's the county utilities office. Talk to Martha. Tell her Earl sent you. She'll get you sorted." He then pointed me toward the bank, the grocery store, and the hardware store. He was giving me a map of my new life. I spent the rest of the day running errands, a man on a mission. I opened a bank account. I bought groceries, bread, peanut butter, canned soup, coffee. Simple things that felt like luxuries. At the hardware store, I bought work gloves, heavy-duty trash bags, a bucket, sponges, and a pry bar. As I paid, the man behind the counter, a guy with a weathered face and kind eyes, asked, "You the one moving into the old Vance place?" News traveled fast in a town this size. "That's me," I said. He nodded. "My dad knew Arthur, said he was a good man, a damn good builder. Shame what happened." He looked at me, a flicker of my grandfather's history reflected in a stranger's eyes. It was a piece of my story, held here in this town all along. By the time I got a ride back to the property, this time from a farmer who offered without my even asking, the sun was setting. I carried the groceries and supplies into the house. It was still dusty, still broken, but now it felt full of potential. I spent the evening cleaning. I scrubbed the kitchen counters until the original formica shone through. I washed the single mug and set it on a clean shelf. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. I was reclaiming the space, 1 square inch at a time. Later, as I sat on the porch, eating a peanut butter sandwich and drinking a bottle of water, I saw it. A sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. It drove slowly down the dirt track, far slower than necessary. It stopped just past my property line. A man in a dark suit got out. He didn't look toward the house. He just stood there for a moment, looking at the land, at the corn crib. Then he got back in the car, and it drove away. My blood ran cold. It had begun. Mr. Abernathy was right. They were watching me. The next morning, I found it wedged in the front door. A crisp, white business card. Stonegate Holdings, it read, with an address in the city and a name. Mark Callahan, Acquisitions. Tucked behind it was a formal offer letter. They were offering $50,000 for the property, as is. $50,000. To a kid who had less than $200 a week ago, It was a staggering sum, but I knew what it was. It was an insult. It was a test. It was the first shot in a war I had chosen to fight. I crumpled the letter in my fist and threw it into the fireplace. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm of hard work and tense vigilance. Every day, I would wake with the sun and work on the house and the land. I filled dozens of trash bags with debris. I tore out the rotten sections of the porch, and using lumber I bought in town, I started rebuilding it. I wasn't a builder. I didn't know what I was doing. But I had my grandfather's journal of my father's early lessons, and I was learning. My hands, once soft, became calloused and strong. I was tired every night, an exhausted, bone-deep ache that was more satisfying than any rest I'd ever known. Mr. Abernathy was my lifeline. We spoke every few days. He guided me through the legal minefield. We filed the paperwork to have the property officially declared my primary residence. We sent a formal rejection of Stonegate's offer via certified mail, along with a notice of harassment, citing my grandfather's journal as evidence of a long-standing pattern of predatory behavior. It was a bluff, but a strong one. The black car continued to make appearances. Sometimes it would park down the road for an hour. Sometimes it would just do a slow drive-by. They were trying to intimidate me, to make me feel isolated and watched. But their presence had the opposite effect. It fueled my resolve. Every time I saw that car, I'd hit a nail a little harder, pull a weed with a little more force. This was my land. They were the trespassers. The community, in its quiet, rural way, began to embrace me. Earl would drop off a newspaper every few days. The farmer who gave me a ride brought me a box of fresh vegetables from his garden. The man at the hardware store gave me a discount on paint. No one ever mentioned Stonegate directly, but there was an unspoken understanding. They had all seen the company's shadow creep over the county. In my fight, they saw a reflection of their own vulnerability, their own love for their land. They weren't just being kind, they were choosing a side. One afternoon, I was clearing brush near the edge of the property when a truck pulled up. It was Earl. "Got something for you," he said, getting out. He went to the bed of his truck and pulled out a small, shivering ball of fur. A puppy. A little mutt with big paws and even bigger ears. "He was a stray, hanging around the store," Earl said, placing the puppy in my arms. "Figured a man with a place this big could use a partner. Good for keeping watch." I held the puppy, its heart beating a frantic rhythm against my palm. It licked my chin. I looked at Earl, my throat tight with an emotion I couldn't name. Thank you." "Every farm needs a dog," he said with a shrug, but his eyes were kind. "What are you going to name him?" I looked down at the little dog, then over at the tall, octagonal building that had become the center of my world. "Cobb," I said. "I'm going to name him Cobb." That evening, I sat on my newly rebuilt porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. Cobb was asleep at my feet, twitching in his dreams. The house behind me was still a work in progress, but it was clean, and it was mine. The air was sweet with the smell of cut grass. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like an absence. It felt like peace. I thought about the word inheritance. When I arrived here, I thought it meant a piece of land, a worthless building. I was wrong. My inheritance wasn't the property. It wasn't even the money or the journal. My real inheritance was the story. It was the truth of my grandfather's sacrifice. It was the legacy of a family that bent, but never broke. And the corn crib. It stood there in the twilight, a silent monument, but not to failure. It was a monument to a father's fierce, desperate love. It was the place where a lie had been kept to protect a family, and where the truth had been stored to save it. It wasn't just a building. It was the safe that held my second chance. It was the place where I stopped being the boy who was kicked out and started becoming the man who was building a home. The fight with Stonegate was far from over. I knew there were harder days ahead. But sitting there, with my dog at my feet and the deed in my name, I wasn't afraid. I had faced the ghosts of my past and found not a curse, but a blessing. I had been given a worthless corn crib, and inside, I had found everything I needed. I had found myself. The journey isn't over. In many ways, it's just beginning. The legal battle with Stonegate will be long and ugly. The house still needs a new roof, the fields need to be tilled, and I have a lifetime of learning to do. But something fundamental has shifted inside me. I am no longer defined by what was done to me, by the door that was closed in my face. I am defined by the door I chose to open. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Maybe you've been handed something that everyone else tells you is worthless. A broken family, a difficult past, a future that looks more like a ruin than a foundation. It's easy to believe them. It's easy to see only the weeds, the rot, the decay. But what I learned, standing in the dust of that old corn crib, is that sometimes the most valuable things are hidden. Sometimes the greatest treasures are buried under a lifetime of other people's opinions and your own fear. The real inheritance isn't what you're given, it's what you choose to build with it. It's the decision to look at a pile of rubble and see the stones for a new foundation. This story, my story, is for anyone who has ever felt discarded. It's a reminder that your worth is not determined by the people who walk away. It's determined by your own choice to stay, to fight, to build, to find the truth buried under the corn. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of second chances and in finding value where others see none, then please subscribe to the channel. I'm going to keep sharing this journey, the good days and the bad, because we all need to be reminded that we are not alone in our struggles. And I want you to share your own story in the comments below. Tell me about a time you found something beautiful in a place everyone else had given up on. I'll be reading them because your stories matter. This community is built on the idea that our pasts don't have to be our prisons. Thank you for listening. The work is hard, but for the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving. I'm building, and it all started with a worthless corn crib.